So up next we have both Gary Gaskell, who I think a lot of you will know from attending AUSCERT all these years. You might recognize him from running the risk management workshop. So we've certainly got a great person on risk there. And then we also have Sergeja, she's the associate professor in accounting at the UQ Business School. So I think over the previous years we've been getting more and more involvement with UQ over the years, which is nice to actually get that benefit from AUSCERT. So I think we have some really good people here to talk about risk and third-party suppliers. I think that'll flow on very nicely from what we've had before. So can I get a really massive round of applause for Gary and Sergeja?
Thank you and welcome all. It's nice to see a good crowd here, and it's been lovely to collaborate with the UQ Business School. We're here today to talk about some insights we've seen into identifying the risk in the supply chain. A very topical issue at the moment. If you're in 11 industries in Australia, it's a legal requirement because supply chain's identified as a hazard and you have to manage the risk in that area. Sorry, we had some issues with the slides, but we'll get into it straight away. We wanted to talk a bit of an outline for us today. I think at least, and Sergeja seeing some from her research, the maturity levels in identifying this risk level is quite low. So I thought it's helpful to talk about the challenges, put this into context for us. Particularly, we're going to hear about the university's research observations. And later on, we're going to give you a link. You can collaborate with the university's business school to help extend that research. And then you get early access to the research for your own organisation. That could be great for your career and your planning. We're going to bring in a bit of real-world experience to see what's happening, what lessons we can draw from it. We've certainly got a theme of let's integrate this with the corporate risk governance. We're going to have a short touch on that, but I know we had a whole shoot for that on Tuesday. And one of our particular challenges is how do we actually find out what that supply chain is? There is the SBOM that John was just talking about, but we're going to look at some other options for us there. So that's what it's going to look like. It's meant to say anecdotes there. We welcome anecdotes and we want to apply Chatham House rules. We don't need to say Gary said this or Mary said that. We want to take out lessons learnt back. So we can stand up and say, hey, at a place where my friend works, and give us some anecdotes. We hope to leave time for that at the end. Because we've got some, but we'd love to, there's a lot more from yourselves as well.
Hello, I'm Sergeja Slapnicar, and I'm Associate Professor at the University of Queensland. I'm in Australia 5 years now. And next to research, I'm really privileged to teach our elite cohorts at the business school, and that is 899 students, top 1%, enrolled in our advanced finance and economics program, and our MBA students. It's so really invigorating to teach such bright young people and to interact with them on a weekly basis. However, as you probably know, research is even larger part of our work, and for the past 20 years I've done research in risk management and governance, but since I moved here I pivoted to cybersecurity space, and I'm trying to apply my expertise to cybersecurity. So we've published with my colleagues from UQ as well as from Europe papers on how effective the internal auditors are in auditing cybersecurity risk management, about how to financially quantify cyber risk, and about cyber governance. And today I'm going to talk about our ongoing research on cyber supply chain risk management.
And we can welcome you quite recently to be an Australian citizen, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. And she's also a great ambassador for tourism for Slovenia.
I convinced 8 of my students this year to go to Slovenia from Australia in June and July for holidays. Not bad, right? It's far.
And for myself, some of you know me, some of you don't, but one of the hobbies I like is bushwalking. Here you can see me in New Zealand, but I just did the overland track in Tassie, which is a great experience. So we better get on with the real work though. We wanted to talk about the challenges, because if this area is quite immature, it's probably because we're finding it hard. And if we're sort of, I probably have a bit of an identity as an engineer, like identify the problem space, then we identify the solutions. Certainly business people are very professional at that as well. And some of the problems we're seeing is just the challenges even identifying the risk, like where is the risk coming from? Particularly, do we have a comprehensive view of our supply chain? I've got some anecdotes for you later on that. But we certainly have a large and complex supply chain. I think John was he talking about 2,000 software systems, and I know organisations that identify as 4,000, and that's before they get into those software packages. But as you know, if we look at the standard corporate risk management process, just identifying the risks is the first step. Then the second step is, how do we analyse it? You know, do we trust what the vendors give us? Or do the vendors even take our phone calls? How do we get accurate profiles from the vendors? Some of them will say, hey, the marketing department's written a security profile and just trust us, right? So that's certainly a challenge. We might also sit on the other side of the table. You might be a vendor like Colby, and people are asking Colby's company, hey, what's your security like? Can we see your policies? Can we have a look under the hood and see if you're actually living the dream of what you're telling us, right? That's a profile challenge for a lot of us, because often we're in part of the supply chain. And I think, Sergeja, you found issues on the resourcing side.
I'll tell about later.
So what do some of these challenges look like? A bit more detail. We've always struggled a bit with shadow IT, people doing stuff outside the corporate structure that the CIO doesn't know about. And I think that's probably got worse with the cloud computing. One of my anecdotes is I was looking at a charity that you'd probably recognise, but we'll keep anonymous, right? I think they had 350 staff, but big budgets. And their CIO said, we've got 2 cloud services. But when we started looking, we found 56. And that was probably with a day's digging. It wasn't much, right? But those 54 additional ones were shadowed. The business were doing it, but they weren't talking to IT. And you might say, oh, it's simple, we'll just find the ones we pay for. Let's go to procurement. But do we even have a central procurement department? Are people buying things on corporate credit cards? Like I know one of our universities, not UQ, but one of our universities down south, they've now got the finance team looking at corporate credit cards to identify shadow IT. I imagine some of us are doing that. And we could talk about procurement. I just did an audit with a critical infrastructure organisation. They had 3 totally separate procurement departments. The one in IT was sort of getting on top of it, but business, there's 2 other ones that were not, right? But procurement department doesn't have to get involved if we're not paying bills for open source. Call out to John, I appreciated that last talk a lot, but in modern software, we've got hundreds of components, so what is that looking like? And that was a great overview there, thanks John, on the last talk. And stepping on further, we talked about the challenge for the analysis, but even when we do identify that supply chain, what sort of assurance are we getting back? Thinking of that anecdote of that charity I was telling you about, 56 cloud suppliers in their organisation, we had SOC 2 reports from 10. I think we had 27,001 certs for another 10. So that's 20. And if you're any good at maths, that means there's 36 others. So it was really clear giving assurance is an early stage from a lot of our supply chain. Part of our issues could be our culture, like the business is doing stuff and IT's too slow, so we won't tell them. Or it's the multi-cloud sort of problem. Our supply chain has their own supply chain, and how do we know what's happening in the background there? And I guess UniSuper is a really good story about that at the moment, right? If I like to go technical, and that's sometimes where we can discover some of the supply chain, but a lot of our organisations have built our protection for control access coming in. They haven't thought about what's going out. So a lot of web proxies are just access everything, no egress controls, we might say. And if we're lucky, we've got some logging there, but they're not actually blocking it. So anyone with a credit card or whatever can sign up to any organisation and put our data in. And then if we go further, as we look into this, and it sounds like I'm giving a long list of problems, our legal department's put some confidentiality clauses in, but have they actually put requirements in for incident notification so we can actually start doing our own response? And it continues on. Like, we probably struggle with on-prem understanding our dependencies, extending our concept of our CMDB, and we might continue there with the software bill of materials. That's still early stages. So if we're trying to identify this supply chain, here's some ideas that I suggest you look at. Let's look at weblogs, one of my favourites, because it's actually what's going out. That's how we picked up most of those I was telling you about in that particular charity. But we also went further. We looked at the business process and go, where's that data you're playing with? Where are you getting it? Where are you storing it? Just show us a bit of a walkthrough. And particularly in that organisation, the executive got alarmed, so the CEO got involved and said, everyone will cooperate with this to explore this. So we could do that. We could go to procurement and legal and get an extract. And we just did that on a recent job, and they had 2,000 suppliers. Then we tried to cut it back, and we looked, they had 1,300 they'd paid in the last 12 months. It's okay. And then we said, how many of them are IT? It was a few hundred. And then we were like, okay, but the next question is, not just IT, but who's got access to our IT? And that was another few hundred. Then we go a step further and go, who's actually got our data in this? That doesn't have to be an IT product to be part of our supply chain if they've got our data, because then there's risk because they're handling our data. And it turned out almost all of that 1,300 was in that supply chain risk.
So I'd like to present you our research about cyber supply chain risk management, because there's quite scarce research about that. There's a lot of research about technical controls, but not so much about organizational approaches in that space. In our systematic literature review, we found out only 6 studies before, and they were just case studies. So we were wondering, what's the state of play here? How do organizations assess cyber risks? How do organizations assess cyber risk? Which characteristics of suppliers they observe? How mature they are in this process? How they synthesize all this information? And how they integrate cyber supply chain risk management within their risk management, cyber risk management. I'm doing this research, it's still not finalized, with my 2 students, Tim Vidmar from Slovenia, who visited last year, and Elinor Cen. She used to be my PhD student, but she's a postdoc researcher now at the University of Queensland Cybersecurity Centre. And it has 2 parts. The first part is qualitative. We interviewed 29 experts. We conducted semi-structured, in-depth interviews. And the second part is the survey with 53 observations. So we are still collecting observations for the survey. 53 is not the number we are happy about, and we'll invite you to participate later on. But I think that knowledge and insights from the interviews are actually already crystallizing in a certain process. I'm going to present you this process of supplier cyber risk assessment now on just one slide so that it's in front of our eyes as a whole. It's not that our interviewees would not be aware of all the steps of this process, but it's just that it requires mammoth resources, because large organizations might have 10,000 of suppliers, and then their suppliers and suppliers and so on. So Gary has already spoken about how difficult it actually is to just identify all the suppliers. And I'm going to skip this step. The second step would be to to establish criticality of a supplier. And usually that is done via three factors. The first one is how critical a supplier is for the focal organization critical processes. Then the second is whether a supplier has access to or hosts the sensitive data. And the third, how well a supplier is integrated within the focal organization IT systems. Criticality then determines the scope and the depth of supplier cyber risk assessment. By scope, I mean how extensive it will be, how many approaches will be used, and how many questions will be posed to a supplier. And by the depth, I mean whether an assurance will be required or not. So this process starts usually with due diligence, general due diligence, where teams like legal, procurement, even IT auditors, compliance, come up with estimation of risks, legal risk, financial risk, strategic risk, geopolitical risks. And if a supplier is non-viable, financially non-viable, or non-viable from any other perspective, then it doesn't even come to further assessment of supplier cyber risk. The second due diligence part is assessing supplier cyber risk posture based on public information. And here the focal organizations would usually look at activity on dark web, collect information about past incidents, negative media coverage, and the most mature ones would have some capability in scanning outward-looking technology of a supplier. Then the next stage would be to send out questionnaires to suppliers. However, that might be the only step, or the steps would conclude there, because it's really different what different organizations use. And questionnaires might be as extensive as hundreds of questions, or as little as 8 questions. Again, it depends on criticality of supplier. And what are the questions? How is cybersecurity posture established? The first and the most important factor definitely is technology and technological controls of a supplier. But then also processes, where it comes down to understanding whether a supplier has incident response plan in place, whether it has a business continuity plan, because as we were told, most of incidents in supplier are actually technological failures rather than a result of malicious activity, and therefore it's very important that the supplier has business continuity plan in place. In terms of people, first parties are interested what's the supplier's management attitude towards protecting information, whether they do any background checks of employees involved in cybersecurity, and whether they do regularly awareness trainings of their employees. If the first party is regulated, it provides a great comfort to it if also a supplier is regulated or subject to industry standards, because it then will have more mature processes in place. Past incidents are also important, and complexity of supplier's supply chain is also a risk factor. However, among our 29 interviewees, only one mentioned that he investigated supplier subcontractors just for one company. It took him 5 months, and he found that the data is actually managed by 12 companies under the supplier on 4 different continents. So that's really expensive, and not many people engage in it, but they usually are aware of subcontractors. Foreign operations and ownership is another risk factor, and supplier itself might be an attractive targeting factor, especially if it's owned by the government or if it's from particular industries. And then reputations. References get collected from suppliers' partners to understand whether supplier is secure or not and what's their experience with it. When it comes to assurance, this data collection is very much based on trust. And not much assurance is required for non-critical suppliers. However, organizations who do supplier cyber risk assessment based on public information would compare this to what they found in the questionnaires, and if there is a big discrepancy, they would have some doubts and investigate further. But only for critical suppliers, pen tests or audit reports would be required. And even a large insurance company, Australian company, told us that they only now are starting to invoke their right to audit. So this is also about power balance, not just about willing to do an assessment or not. And then, like for some organizations collect vast amount of information. How do they synthesize it, and how do they assess whether a supplier is of low, medium, or high level? And that's pretty much subjective, I would say, even though this is a risk for which most KPIs are collected. Quite a lot of information is collected. It's synthesized in a subjective way. However, we need to know that supplier cyber risk assessment, supplier cyber risk posture only indicates likelihood that the supplier will have an incident, whereas criticality is about impact that an incident in a supplier would have on the focal organization. So that impact somehow softly gets combined into this overall assessment. Another thing is that these questionnaires usually don't capture any level of maturity in supplier, which might vary a lot. Like they would be just yes and no question, and there is no single score. Only one bank told us that they would have some maturity level scale, and they would come up with a score. From there on, the decision is suggested to the decision makers, to management, whether a supplier should be offered a contract or avoided. However, even if a supplier is of high risk, we came across testimonies that their recommendation was not always respected. If a supplier is of low risk, a contract would be offered to them, but if it's of medium risk, then the information about this supplier would basically be just taken as a snapshot of the missing controls, and they would still onboard it if it's interesting from a business perspective. And then the focal organization might engage in uplifting the supplier's security posture. But we need to know that supplier cyber risk assessment is just an assessment in a point in time. So therefore, it's very static and it won't hold long. So periodic monitoring is definitely warranted. However, again, it really very much depends on criticality. For most critical suppliers, that would be annually, biannually, maybe triannually, or at the renewal of the contract, as it is the case for non-critical suppliers. And some mature organizations would actually integrate threat intelligence into their CM, and they would automate the monitoring of a supplier, technical controls. But it is really very interesting that we found organizations who would have almost zero in terms of selection process, and then automated monitoring of supplier once is onboarded, and the other way around. Supplier would have, the focal organizations would have really good selection process and then no monitoring after it, which is quite interesting. They were aware of this situation. However, usually it's just one person or two persons who are working on that, and they just can't cope with the amount of work and get everything at the same maturity level. So which companies are the most mature in supplier cyber risk assessment? It came through that would be regulated companies that are under regulation, prudential regulation, financial industry, ICT industry, or another critical industries, especially if they are large. And the combination of the two is particularly powerful, because then they dedicate lots of resources to IT governance, and they have clear responsibility lines, also top leadership support. One very best case that we've heard of was the case of German banks who go and audit the three clouds, the largest clouds, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, because they are required so by their financial regulator. And they do that in a consortium because they say in security space we are not competitors. We want to make the industry safe, and therefore we pool resources. We go there together. They even involve Italian banks and some insurance companies. And they do it pretty regularly for all three of them. So this, I think, is the best case and could also be indicative of the way to go forward, especially because there will be so many more risks to control in suppliers, apart from cyber risks, also ESG risks, and that's the regulation in Australia. And how does all this process sit within cyber risk management process of an organization? My perception was that it is fairly disintegrated. So even though there's so much data collected, it doesn't really have the same scales in risk assessment as it is for other cyber risk, let alone other risk in the enterprise risk metrics. But it could perhaps be better integrated, because the first part belongs to risk identification phase. The second part about assessing criticality of supplier and supplier risk posture is risk analysis, then decision is taken, and then risk treatment follows, and monitoring. So this is just these very well-known phases, 5 phases of cyber risk management. We followed up with a survey, and I'm just going to give you a brief snapshot of the results here. We weren't quite happy with qualitative research, because it always depends with who you speak, even though we had really good sample across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore, and also a wide variety of organizations. But nevertheless, survey would give us some confidence that what we found is actually can be generalized. I'm not going to go into other details, but there are 4 points that I'd like to mention. Technology has come out as the most important factor, because in this survey, respondents were asked to assess one of their suppliers, either one who has suffered a cyber incident or one that hasn't, and then provide the assessment that they had. And so on 8 out of 13 technology controls, suppliers with an incident scored worse than those without, at the later point. However, very interesting is the finding that on processes, they didn't score worse. So it didn't help if they had incident response plan, business continuity, IT governance role. Didn't help, and then probably warrants more research, more observations. I'm not happy by concluding now at this point to conclude that governance doesn't matter. In terms of people, management attitudes, transparency with the first party and reputation really matter, and suppliers without incidents scored way better. Threat intelligence is paramount. Red flags were raised significantly more often for suppliers who later had an incident. But what was also interesting is that suppliers who were classified as less critical actually had more incidents. And then they were almost overlooked in the process. Gary, over to you.
And I think that makes a bit of sense to us. The more technical, the ones that, if a supplier, we can tell if they're using DMARC or not, just from their DNS records, or they're not offering MFA to their customers. You go, hey, they're a bit behind the game. Their website certificates has expired. It's indicative that their controls are a bit weak. And Sergeja's research has not validated that they're the ones that are more likely to have incidents, rather than the ones that were clear on their processes. Hey, so we talked about the challenges with risk identification earlier. Then we could talk about the challenges with actually analysing the risk. And to analyse the risk, we need inputs. The biggest input on the likelihood of the side of the risk equation is how good are the controls. And we've established that we get often limited level of assurance. You could get a 27,000 one, you get a one-page document. Maybe they'll give you an SOA, but the SOA is just the annex of the standard saying tick applies. It's not that exciting, right? Some of you doing questionnaires. Sergeja found some doing only 8 questions. I've seen one Australian organisation, 1,300 questions. Oh my goodness. Imagine you get that and you have to fill it out. But hey, anyone here doing questionnaires? How big's your questionnaire? Is it 20 questions? You know, show of hands. Thereabouts. 50 questions? Over 100? Wow. Hey, more hands there. What, over 200? Okay, only one over 200. So the biggest majority is over 100 questions in the questionnaire. Thanks, Colby. Hey, I've got a list of other ways we can get some information. Attestations, 27,000. SOC 2, I think, is great. 150-page report, typically. List of all the controls. List of actually what the auditor did. If the auditor said, I interviewed, you go, oh, well, maybe it's not a great audit. Different standards there, whether it's America or Australia. Or a right to audit, which the challenge is we don't get that with the cloud. We've got some recommendations. We're running close on time, and unfortunately we had that tech issue at the start. But clearly I think applying a bit of a maturity model. We can't go from nothing to perfect straight away. Building this up as we go would be great. We think right sizing, so some of the suppliers that have high inherent risk, maybe they're the ones we want to go into the extra diligence level. I'll leave this up because we'd love you to contribute to UQ's research. Please consider that. All right. Do we have anything else you want to say, or we go into questions?
We can go into questions. So I would just like to invite you, if you like to hear about research and what others are doing, so please consider participating. We've got the link here. We had it already last year. And also, I would also kindly invite you to participate in an interview, because we would like to go over 30 and maybe 40 observations. Thank you.
And you get early access to the research.
Yeah, I promise the report and the whole paper with all descriptions and everything.
Wow, massive round of applause. There is a lot of people here, and they've been eating this up, I think, because I can certainly speak for myself, but I think I'm speaking for the whole audience. We're all struggling with this. So I have a bunch of questions, and I'll ask what I can, but I'm probably not going to get to everything, so certainly get that QR code. So I will go into, do you think SOC 2 reports is the magic pudding?
I'd like to say ladies first, but maybe I raised SOC 2, so I should do.
No, don't leave it to me. You are in the field.
Look, SOC 2, nothing's perfect, but if you get a SOC 2 report and it's 100+ pages, they typically make you sign a non-disclosure because they're a little bit wary about the content. You've got stuff to discriminate on there and inform some good decisions. Now, to give you one anecdote, I was working on a merger and acquisition. It was $1 billion transaction last year, and they're like, we had a whole team analysing cyber risks, and part of the initiative was they had to go to a cloud service for a complaint system, and it had to be done in like 3 months or 6 months. That sort of time-based, it's like pay the money now type thing. But we found an issue and we got it fixed before the business joining happened. And it was from reading the SOC 2 report. When we read the SOC 2 report, you could do a gap analysis. Because you can put a SOC 2 report on anything, but this one didn't have backup. And the salespeople said, well, we got replication from London to Germany. And we go, that's great. So the replicated encrypted bits from the ransomware will be duly replicated to Germany. Where's our data? And they go, oh, that's a good point. Fascinating. They said, why is an Australian company, I just maybe won't mention the industry, raising that? No one else in the world has, and we think we're the biggest world supplier in this niche SaaS application. And that came from reading the SOC 2 report, just that gap analysis. And we said, you must provide us assurance of basically offline backup before we'll put our data into your cloud. And they did. So that's a big success story.
I don't know if this is a bit of a difficult one to answer, but what do you think is the best approach for people to do cyber risk assessment? Is it to start sending out their own list of questions to all their suppliers? Well,
one solution also is, which I didn't talk about, is third-party vendors. That is also because they collect a large amount of information and then supplier answers only once. However, there is still cost-benefit analysis related to that, whether it pays off for you. And that is a big question, always resources dedicated to that. But I think that just putting in place this process at even a moderate maturity level would also would show some consistency and would eventually work out. Don't you agree, Greg?
I support that, absolutely. I think in our talk today we said we've got to know what the supply chain is first before we can assess the risks. But if we do risk assessment, we know we're meant to start with the scope and context and what are we actually protecting. And I think if you're like working for an Australian bank, the first thing you protect is settlements before you protect your ATM or branch network. And maybe that could set some priorities for our analysis, because if you can't settle today, you lose your banking licence tonight.
We've had a lot of talk about operational technology today. Throughout your research and question surveys, have you had anyone looking into this kind of thing for operational technology instead of just software?
As I mentioned, well, one frustration is, of course, software, because people mentioned, yes, some people said, we are frustrated because we can't look into libraries in the software, but in other countries, like smaller countries, would say, oh, we cannot even be too demanding because then we won't find a supplier in our country. So it really depends. And because I'm not a cybersecurity expert, I would leave it to you again.
Actually, that can be done quite well, particularly the type of operational technology where you legally need a chief engineer to sign off a legal commissioning process. Those type of organisations have full drawings, full equipment lists, exact down to the versions, and they know exactly what they got and that they have in their deployed in their plan. So it can be really good there.
Do you know if there's any generic questionnaires for people to use as a template out there?
I think so, yes. There are quite a few templates. Right, so yeah, I can get back to this with some examples. So if you email me, and my email is down here, I will send you what we have in our paper now. So there are templates provided by the government. Sometimes this is by a regulator. And so it depends on the industry. Sometimes it's by a parent company, requirement by a parent company, but there definitely are templates.
ACSC specifically tries to help Australian community. They've got a special one just for questions you should ask your cloud service providers. So that's the first thing on top of my head. But that's just that niche of cloud, right? Your supply chain is bigger.
And yeah, and on these slides, which you can get, there's also lots of standards cited, but in our paper, which I can send to you, we also cite all the regulations. So we take a snapshot of all the regulation that provides really good examples. NIST case studies, for example, or we just take a snapshot of all what we found relevant.
So there's plenty of further reading for you to solve your insomnia, but we'll go back so you got the QR code in case you want it.
I would love to keep asking questions because there's a bunch of really good things here. We are kind of running out of time. Are you both going to be available outside after this?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll be around.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, really just I want to extend a massive thank you to the UQ Business School just because this is something that I know that every single person I know in a compliance team is massively struggling with, and even on the other end of working at a company who is a software vendor, the receiving end of these questionnaires is its own problem in itself. So it's just really good to know that there is research being put into this because I think this has a very massive impact in our lives, but also fundamentally how secure we will be at the end. So yeah, can I get like a massive round of applause again?
Thank you.